Okay, so now what we're going to do is have our Q&A forum. This will be moderated by our brand new Provost and Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sue Thomas.
Who's burning to ask a question of our panel? Yes, over here.
I'm very interested in your invention and how the weather people are able to tell us humble graziers what's going to go on in future with global warming and the hot or cold in the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean. And we are now getting a much more accurate arrangement so we know where we're going. The question I'd like to ask you is, these things float round, do they die in the ocean or do you collect them? I take it you just dispose of them, you can't go on and use them again and again. But is this going to develop even more? We're only just starting on this technology and information.
Well, there's a bunch of great questions there, but in the interest of time, let me say, I think we're just starting. I think, as I said, I'm lucky enough to have a job where I go into the lab and look at the students, and every week they're making better sensors and using longer batteries and figuring out how to send more information through the network. Yes, we have versions of these robots that do come back. They're called gliders. They glide through the ocean that, you glide through the air in a fun glider. These have been used in all kinds of ways. During this horrible oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, you probably remember from BP, my colleague Dan Rudnick had all of his gliders and all of his students were going out there finding where the oil was. So they had a little sensor on the front of the robot that could detect whether it was in sort of pure salt water or in a mixture of oil and water, and mapping out where this gigantic oil slick was moving. And that wasn't something that we had ever planned in the lab. It wasn't in anybody's strategic plan. It was just a couple of students sitting down in the lab, and so we could put a little velocity profiler in the top front of this robot and we could figure out whether it's oil or water. So I think it's just beginning. If you don't mind, I won't go into a long answer about how we have better weather forecasts, but really the reason why the weather forecasts in the southern hemisphere are now just as good as in the northern hemisphere is because we have all this ocean data. If you're sitting in Germany and you want to know what the weather's going to be like, you just look at what the weather is in London today, and it's 90% of the time it's the same. If you're sitting in Perth, there was nobody sitting out there in the middle of the Indian Ocean to tell you what the weather was, and being able to combine satellite data with this kind of robotic data has meant that our weather forecasts in Australia have become really fantastic in my view. It's a deeper question about how our knowledge of the thermohaline circulation and how it's slowly changing is going to affect our average rainfall in 10 or 20 years. But by the time we get there, I think my generation's going to leave a bit of a mess for the young generation here. But I hope we will have given you enough tools to figure out how to measure it and then, by some miracle, form the right policy to address it.
I just have a question for Miss Rhodes. What's the difference between civil engineering and structural engineering?
Good question. Structural engineering, you can do it as a separate degree to civil engineering, but the way I did my degree at the University of New South Wales 20 odd years ago, and structural engineering was one of the majors within civil engineering. Civil engineering has 5 majors. You've got, depending on the university you go to, but where I went, you had structural, construction, geotechnical, water or traffic, and they were the choices you had on your majors, and that's what you became. At the time, there were other universities that just did a structural engineering degree, and they were more centred on structural engineering, so it depends on how you do your degree and how you use it.
I'm a teacher and I'm interested in the STEM teaching and where you guys see, I guess, exciting kids in these sorts of areas. I'm a music teacher and now a technology teacher, so I come from that particular background. And when STEM popped up, and everybody said this is a really cool thing, from a technology teacher's point of view, teaching design tech, a lot of what STEM is about relates to what we're doing. And I guess we need to see where you see it happening and how it's going to happen. The problem we see, I guess, is demarcation, which of course we don't want to have happen. We want everybody to be dragged along. But is it maths that's going to carry it? Is it science? Is it engineering studies, which is under a different umbrella again? They're the sorts of questions I'm interested in.
Where I think some exciting things are going right now is that you just look online and like how many kids now have Arduinos and things like that. I mean, that is a great platform. Everyone should be, okay, I'm biased. Everyone should learn how to program, and what a great way to do it. And the number of cheap sensors out there that you can put on our Arduino platform and do science experiments on whatever you want in your own backyard. And I think more schools are incorporating them. You see them a lot in university level research too. It's just a very nice way to get introduced to science. So that's my 2 cents.
I think it's biology. You know, when I was a kid, we didn't know that 90% of the living matter in the ocean was bacteria and viruses. You know, it's like there's 186 million blue whales out there and we never knew about them. You know, that's the amount of mass in the ocean, that's bacteria and viruses. We know hardly anything about them, partly because it's a pain in the neck to go and collect them. You know, I think the next generation of robots will be out there sampling the DNA of the ocean. We'll find all kinds of little bugs that are useful, you know, maybe drugs that address cholera, like some of my colleagues have found in the ocean. My colleague Dave was the chief scientist on the Jim Cameron's expedition to the bottom of the ocean, 10,000 meters down. They found all kinds of bacteria at the bottom of the ocean that have completely different phospholipids than we do. You know, these are like real alien life. So, you know, I love engineering and chemistry and physics, and, you know, that's what I've done. But if I had to say what's coming next, I think there's going to be this whole real explosion of biology, you know, probably outside the terrestrial realm that we can't even begin to comprehend.
Okay, I think it's all subjects that come up into STEM. Art, look at your art history, look at your architecture, look at the whole history of architecture and art and your form in art. Look at your music, look at your rhythm, the whole lot of it. It's all mathematics and science in all your subject matter. Even in your English, your different ways that you write in English. A lot of them are scientific methods. So STEM comes into all subject areas that you study at school, even PE. If you look at how you hop, or actually how you go and beat someone up with a paquito, it's all got to do with physics. So to me, encouraging people into STEM is through all the different subject areas, and all the subject areas understanding how they relate to each other. Because STEM's not just about maths and science and engineering, it's about the whole world and how the whole world works as one. We're all one world. We just happen to have a brain that understands maths and science and how it can relate to music, art, PE and everything else. I just think it's the whole lot.
I think it's probably really important that a lot of us have a view that science is pure and you're just doing that research part of science. And what I think he's missing in a lot of the areas is actually taking that research and being able to apply it to everyday living, to, for example, in my work, we have to apply the science or the outcomes of that science to management decisions. So how are we actually going to take that research, those numbers, those outcomes, and then create a policy or develop a policy that's actually going to help the community, and not just your local community, but, you know, the state, internationally. So I think that's the missing link. I don't know whether it's not a subject issue. I think we just don't complete the cycle, and there's an applied issue with completing that cycle.
I was going to say I completely agree, and I think really the take-home message is that the STEM disciplines really do underlie most subjects. but getting that message out and communicating that becomes a problem, and I think that's where we fell down for quite a few years, probably a few decades. So when it comes to, we do a lot of engagement work with school kids, and it's really getting them to think about asking questions and asking what the science is behind something. You know, if they see a cool experiment where you drop Mentos into Coke and it explodes, that's fun to do, but wanting to know why that reaction happens and switching on that, you know, ask about why did these things happen. That's really the underlying issue that I see a lot now with school kids, and having school-age kids myself. We do a lot of engagement work trying to, you know, get the idea that STEM really underlies a lot of the things that they're interested in and the careers that they want to go into. So, you know, an 8-year-old boy told me the other day the only thing he wants to be is an NRL superstar. He just wants to play rugby league and be paid a lot for it. And I said, do you know that the people who train and teach you how to, you know, there's a lot of physics in figuring out how the team plays. There's exercise physiologists that work out the best way to tackle, the best way to recover from injury. There's a scientist behind every decision that's made in the NRL. And he went, oh, okay. So I guess, you know, promoting that idea and that way of thinking is another thing as well.
So one of the things you will have noticed is that there's no typical day in the life of a scientist that characterises all of these people down the front. And we've heard about bumblebee flight and stuff in pipes that's unmentionable. So what are some of the weirdest things you've done in your science and engineering careers, and why were they worth doing?
I was lucky enough to go to Antarctica to do my research quite a few times, and I was catching fish and sucking the blood out of them for various reasons that probably best not mentioned. Because you're down there with a whole lot of engineers and scientists that are each doing their own thing, whether it's studying cosmic rays or my friend Jerry Coonan adopted all these little orphan penguins. You know, and if you're a penguin, you're born on the ice, right? So how do you know that when the ice melts and there's a pool of water, you're supposed to jump in? Well, what you do is you learn from your mother, or maybe your father. Well, if you're an orphan penguin and you've been left behind, you know, how do you know? So Jerry collected these 20 or 30 little orphan penguins and just put them next to a pool of water and watched them and until they decided to jump in the water. And then, of course, when one did, all of them did. The reason that Jerry's a bit notorious is he did this one year and he lost track of which penguin was which. So the next year when I met him, he'd placed a big orange number 1 spray painted on the front of penguin and number 2 and 3, like, kind of like that cartoon show of all the spacecraft. So the craziest thing is there was a guy there who wanted to track seals, and he had this $70,000 instrument pack that he wanted to glue to the top of a seal. And we had cut a hole in the ice and assured him this was the only hole for 200 kilometres. And so he dumped the seal and $70,000 in the hole. Of course, it never came back.
That was a good one. Any other offerings from the panel?
The only interesting thing I've done that could be strange is sitting in sewage treatment plants and watching the sewage come in and time the slugs, because they come in as slugs when you're dealing with pressure sewer. It doesn't smell as bad as you think.
I'd just like to ask the panel what advice they might have for us old greying people who see a bit of a generation gap between what our knowledge and education in science has been and is compared to, you know, children growing up, and, you know, how we might be able to breach that gap to some extent.
I've been lucky enough in the last couple of years to actually work with some, I guess, graduates. We have a graduate program with DPI Water, and every year we actually take an intake of graduates. And I guess I used to sit around the table when I started work, and I was the youngest one, and now, unfortunately, I sit around the table and I'm one of the oldest ones sitting around the table, which is a bit of a culture shock. But I've been lucky enough to work with these young graduates, and I think part of the answer is being, I guess, willing to sit with them, to talk to them, to, I guess, get an appreciation of where they're coming and I guess how they've moved through their education. It is very different to what we did years ago, and I think it's all about communicating. It's all about sitting around the table and talking and be willing to actually open up your mind and to take in that information. Sometimes it's a little bit hard because they go at 100 miles an hour, and seriously, sometimes I can't keep up with them. But I think it's a communication and actually just sitting down and talking.
I agree. We were actually having a discussion before the session started, and I'm going to say that I'm somewhere in the middle. So I have a lot of very young, enthusiastic students that work with me that seem to know 10 times what I do, and I spend a lot of my time, once we make discoveries, trying to convince older people in the profession, particularly in medicine and older doctors, to take on new discoveries and new ways of treating patients and new things. And quite often the battle is that we need to explain it better, and we need to give you the evidence, and we need to say, this is the discovery and this is what supports it. But the older generation, you're never ever too old to learn and to change. And so I think, like you said, opening up to being educated and wanting to learn more, that's probably the biggest hurdle that I see with working with older generation, is really just that some of them don't want to open up. So the fact that you've even asked that question is perfect, because you're acknowledging that you need to change. But it's really being open-minded and wanting to, I guess, being educated by younger people as well. So yeah, that's...
Tony.
I think it's being able to somehow keep up with the modern communication tools. When I look at the creative process now, in my own career, half the things that I did that were any good, I ran into someone in the library. It was one of my colleagues. It wasn't what I was looking for. It was the book next door, or it was a colleague in the office next door. I think there's a lot of serendipity in the way that innovation is done. And one of the great things about modern communications, and whether it's Twitter or group chat rooms and so on, is that we put together a project like this with 23 countries. We can have everybody sitting around in a virtual table and be bouncing ideas off and arguing about whether we want to add more instruments or just keep the ones we have and make sure they work better. If you cut yourself off from that modern suite of communication tools, you're really cutting yourself off from a huge part of the creative process. I'm tempted to say that even High Court justices should know how to answer email, but that's probably too political. But I taught my mum, my mum is 86 now, when I taught her email when she was 75, she says it's the best thing I've ever done for her. She taught all of her friends, and she's able to stay in touch with people as they get older, maybe less mobile, they don't play bridge or have coffee or something. I think there's part of the social interaction and the creative process that's facilitated by all these tools that are being invented every day.
So one of the things that it can seem when you're studying science at school is that it's all very serious, but here we've got people that all seem to have very rich lives. We've heard about children and ceramics and mountain bikes. Without divulging too much about yourself, talk to us about the things that you do away from your science, so that people can see that there is a whole life out there, not just science and science alone.
Do you want me to start this time? We'll start at the other end. I do a lot outside of my science. I have 3 young children, so I spend a lot of time with them. I also play a very high 4th grade of hockey in Newcastle, and I've always played hockey, which takes up a lot of my time as well. I guess I get, besides those things, it's really hard to remove yourself from being a scientist outside of work. So I spend a lot of time, I was saying earlier, my husband is a software engineer, so he is also a scientist. We spent a lot of time reading online, and we decided that we both wanted to know about the Higgs boson discovery, and so we taught each other how nanophysics and about nanoparticles, and then we debate about it, and I'm sure our kids think that we're crazy and that we're speaking another language, but it's really, it never leaves you being a scientist. But yeah, I probably spend way too much time playing hockey and hanging out with all of my hockey friends as well, and none of them are scientists, and none of them, it's really nice to have that life away from science as well. So yeah.
a lot of my spare time's taken up. I have an 8-year-old son, so he keeps me very, very busy. So yeah, we walk the dog. He's just started to cook dinner, so that's really quite cool. I can sit at the bench and order him around and just make sure he doesn't burn himself on the steam. I mountain bike ride, and that's something that I took up to clear the mind and to get outside again and actually do something physical. But you know what? There's a lot of science in mountain bike riding. You've got to have the right pressure in your tyres, you've got to have your seat tilted the right way, your handlebars have to be at the right angle, your pedals have to be set up properly. Still doesn't stop you from falling off, but I spend time with friends. I've got some really good friends, so we do the coffee, we have dinner. One of my best friends has just had a baby, so I'm kind of a new aunt, so that's taken up some time. So yeah, it's not all about science, but science does creep into your everyday life. It just happens. It's everywhere.
I've got 4 kids ranging in age from 9 to 21. So they take a little bit of time. Then there's the husband. They take a hell of a lot of time. Mine's full-time on the farm, so every weekend I actually spend farming, feeding out cattle, tagging them, injecting them with stuff, which, of course, we like to use our science because we make all our own injectables because we're both engineers, we've both done our chemistry. So instead of buying multi-minute 300 a tube, we just pay $20. Chemistry, it's a great thing. I also do a bit of Hapkido, which is a Korean martial art. Started that when my second youngest started doing it and I couldn't be bothered driving backwards and forwards. Absolutely love it, and don't ever try to surprise me because it could be a problem for you. And that's all right, that happens. And that's about it. But, and of course I'm studying my masters at the moment, so if you find 5 seconds for me, can you please tell me?
Boy, this is hard. I think one of the things that strikes you as you go on in science is maybe the disconnect between, those people who collect and look at data and then the real world out there, the rest of the world. So I think a lot of people of my generation, who grew up writing scientific papers, and I would publish a paper and 3 people would email me, and one of them was my mum. And I guess that's the reason I taught her how to email. You realise you might be reaching a fairly limited audience, and then you have some experience, where by accident or something you connect with hundreds of thousands of people, and so one of the things that I've been spending more time doing is not just communicating science to my 3 friends and my mum. It's how to reach out to, broad audiences. And that takes a lot of time because you have to think about it. First of all, you sort of have to understand the audience or understand what the audience is. So I think we, in the sort of rarefied scientific community, we probably have a lot to learn about communication. So I spend a lot of time trying to figure that out.
So I know there's a danger that I'm going to sound a little bit less well-rounded than everyone else. But I meant it when I said analytical chemistry was my calling. I have a lab here, I have one in Tasmania, I have one in my garage, and I have one in my office. And what I like to do in the evenings is put together my components and build new instruments. It's what brings me joy and happiness. And most of them don't work, but I entertain myself. I do also like to sew, so you can all admire my perfectly matched side seams during pizza today. And I have started an Armadale STEM sewing circle, and 2 unnamed people in the audience are also here who'd like to make their own clothes. So, yeah, that's about what I do.
Would any of you say that you use a lot of mathematics in your careers every day or most days?
Yeah. Every day, all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sadly, the only true thing that was ever told me is the more maths you know, the better you are. And it doesn't matter whether you're a biologist or, it's just something, for some reason, that's the way the world is. So whether you're writing code or designing this and that or building sewers, it's just the language that you need to use in STEM, and so please, every opportunity you have, study that calculus.
I should probably point out, once you start using it in your career, it's very, very different to studying it. And once you start applying it and using it every day, it becomes a tool that you can use for your discoveries. You know, we use it to figure out how much of our chemotherapy drugs we need to make up. So we use our chemistry, we use our maths, and we use physics every day with the equipment. But you're not actually thinking, oh, I'm doing maths again. It's actually something that you need to do to do the job. And when you love the job and you love the work that you're doing, you don't actually consciously think about that you're using maths every day. It's just something that but you need to have the understanding and the background to be able to use it well. So yeah, that's why you have to study it first.
You don't actually use it as numbers, it's just the language. It's just, like learning English.
Dr. Barton said earlier about her PhD students being problem solvers. Any ideas on how we can teach our kids to start being better problem solvers? From anyone, not just me.
Yeah, well, I guess from my experience being a kid a long time ago and having them around me constantly at the moment, I really encourage them to ask questions. And so, if they've got a new toy and it's a remote control car, and they'll actually start asking me, how does it work? Like, how does the remote in my hand make the car run over there? If I don't know the answer, I encourage them to sit down with me, and we might Google it and have a look and figure it out. And I really, really want them to question everything. And so that's some of the PhD students that come in and start with us don't have that when they first start. They've just finished schooling and university, where a lot of it is learn and regurgitate, which I hate to say, but you sit exams and you have to remember all of the information. But the questioning is something then that comes with the process. So I'll give them an outline of their project, and I'll say, start asking me questions. Start asking, I don't care if it's challenging. I want you to ask. And so we had an undergraduate student start with us on Monday. And on Wednesday, he asked me a question that completely floored me, and I've given him a little tiny project, which is a part of a project we've been working on for 5 years, and it's a protein that we've been working on. And he said to me, if this protein interacts with the DNA, then it's not on the surface of the cell, is it? And I went, no, it's not. But after 5 years of working on this protein, he just asked one simple question where I went, you have really just nailed something that we need to look into. And I said, keep asking questions, please. And we might not know the answer, but that's what science is, then figuring out the answer.
Yeah, look, I would agree. I think that's the key, is encouraging the kids to actually ask the questions, to inquire. And I know from personal experience with Ty, I actually create him problems. So we'll create a problem, and then he has to actually go away and try to solve that problem or find a way to actually get the answer. And usually it's Dr. Google. But we actually did an exercise with his class at school where we went out to Jamerick Dam, and we collected some bugs, and we sort of talked about water management, and then we gave them all a very simple problem. So we split them up into pairs, and these guys are only in first class, so they're young, but they actually went away, they thought about it, they came back and asked us questions. So it's I guess creating the habit of inquiring and being able to actually ask the questions that will eventually lead to the answer.
Trauma of Mind, it's really good. That was on last weekend, down in Coffs at least. Those sort of programs run by the schools are really good with problem solving. They done in mathematics and literacy and everything like that, but they're really good programs. And Dr. Google, and being on, like, if you can get near farms and stuff where there's broken things everywhere and they have to try to work out how to fix them, that's the best way of getting kids to go and learn how to fix things, because they've got no choice, otherwise they don't get food.
I just have a question about travel. For postgraduate studies or work, would you encourage people to travel overseas? And if so, what are the benefits of doing that?
Great question. So many answers.
Yes. No, there's one answer. The answer is yes, you should consider it. Well, why not, really? I mean, visas for a lot of countries are hard to get for most of your life. But this is the one opportunity where countries are fighting for you. So take advantage of it and get your PhD overseas and do your postdocs overseas, maybe do another one back here, and then settle here. But it's just such a great opportunity. And in addition to, you'll pick up a lot of cultural insights, and you'll have adventures and travel adventures, but it also means that if you decide on a career in science, you now have a global network. And that's going to make a big difference later on when you're trying to establish yourself and when you're going to conferences and you'll get to meet people.
Other pressing questions? Otherwise, I'll ask Erica to come back. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, panel.
So that brings the formal proceedings of the evening to an end. So we'll adjourn for a casual pizza dinner and mingle.